Hey, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Amanda. If you're new here, I talk all about simple and intentional living and just creating a life on purpose, creating a life of intention. And today I wanted to talk about how to declutter the hard stuff. Recently, my kids were asking me if they could look through their baby boxes, and it kind of prompted me to look through my own sentimental box of items. And it made me think about how this can be a really hard thing to tackle. Now, as someone personally who's not an overly sentimental person by nature, I never really have attached too much to physical items. I mean, I do to some extent. I think everybody does. Some of us are definitely more sentimental than others. However, I think all of us by nature do have some sort of attachment to physical things that remind us of our past in some way. And so today I'm going to share with you 7 tips that I think will significantly help if you are tackling this. Now, I do think if you're in the beginner early stages of decluttering physical stuff in your home, I wouldn't touch this stuff right now. But if you've done a lot of the other decluttering and you're finally getting around to the sentimental stuff, it's kind of been on the back burner for a while, here's some tips to kind of help you through that. So the first thing I would recommend is just to simply acknowledge the emotions that come up when you're looking through your sentimental stuff. A lot of the time we kind of get hung up on decluttering sentimental items because we don't really know how to process what we're feeling, but I think it's important to just kind of take a moment and look at an item and think about how it makes you feel. Like, is it something that brings you a lot of joy because it's attached to a really happy memory? Or is it maybe something negative, like you have something that you're holding on to from a childhood friend that you're not friends with anymore and it's kind of making you sad more than anything else. I've personally experienced this because one of my very best childhood friends and I, we're still friends to this day. However, as our lives have gone, our separate ways, we don't stay as close in touch as I would like to. But I have a few things still from our childhood. We used to send each other letters and gifts in the mail all the time. But it does make me feel kind of sad because I'll look at these items and think, wow, it's a shame that our friendship isn't what it used to be. So instead, if you're dealing with something like this, just acknowledge how it's making you feel and think, you know what? Maybe instead of hanging on to these physical things that just make me feel bad, maybe I can part with this and instead make an effort to rebuild that friendship if it's important, if that's something that's important to you. That's just kind of an example, but all of that to say, there will be some things I'm sure that you'll go through that don't really have the best feeling attached to them when you're looking at them. And so just take a moment to acknowledge that, because it might be easier to part with certain things than you think if they're only bringing about negative emotions. Okay, the next tip would be to set your intention. So, okay, I know for a lot of us, technically the sentimental stuff isn't really taking up a lot of physical space in our homes. Like, I know for me personally, I have one box and it's tucked up on a shelf in my closet. So really, I mean, clutter wise, it's not taking up a lot of physical space. And I think that's the case for most of us. We don't have boxes and boxes of sentimental clutter. Maybe some of us do, but I think most of us don't. And so we might look at it and think, well, what's the big deal about going through that? Because it's not really taking up that much space. I can just leave it on that shelf. It's out of the way, it's not really a big deal. But I was thinking about this when I went through my own personal box, and I thought, well, okay, yeah, it's just sitting here in my closet on a shelf, but I only look at it maybe once or twice a year that I actually go through it and intentionally look through these items. And what's the point of that, really? I mean, if these things are valuable to me, if they're that important to me, wouldn't I want to appreciate them and enjoy them more often? So what I mean by setting your intention when you're going through your sentimental clutter is to think about it this way. Like, yeah, I can keep this stuff in a box tucked away, look at it once or twice a year, and that's great. Or I can go through it, pick out what I think is truly valuable to me and means the most to me, and find a way to maybe display it in my home so I can enjoy it and appreciate it all the time. Maybe the approach should be to display a few rather than store many. Okay, so tip number 3 is kind of tied to that. If you are that overly sentimental person who has boxes and boxes and bins of sentimental stuff, maybe you've kept every single clothing item from your child because you just can't part with it. If you're that type of person, set a boundary. So if you don't already have like one box in your bedroom closet for sentimental items and you've got tons of stuff, maybe pick the size of a bin or a couple baskets, something that you can physically set a boundary to, and declutter just to that amount of space. This way you still have your space for your sentimental stuff, but it's not so overwhelming. So tip number 4 is this one actually kind of ties into tip number 3. So these kind of flow I didn't even realize that they kind of flow nicely together. Tip number 4 is to choose the most special. If you went on a vacation and you have photos and seashells and you brought back some sand and you have a t-shirt, and like you have a whole bunch of stuff from one specific event or moment in time, try just picking the most special and consider decluttering the rest. I don't know where I heard this. I don't know if it's a quote by somebody. It always stuck with me that if everything is special, then nothing is special. I think about that every time. Like if I go through baby photos. Nowadays, for example, with our kids, we have endless photos on our phone of our kids. Back when I was a kid, we maybe had a couple photos from an event here or there, and throughout the year, you maybe put together like a small album at most. But for me, looking back on my childhood photos, it's more special to me to see a few photos from like one event than a camera roll of 100 photos of the same thing. So yeah, try and think of that when you're decluttering and trying to physically condense your sentimental items. If everything is special, nothing is special. Okay, tip number 5, digitize where possible. If you do have a lot of stuff, like a lot of letters from a certain friend or a lot of photos from a certain event, maybe pick one to display or to keep physically and take photos of the rest and store them on a hard drive, maybe on your computer. I've done this though, and I do find that you don't really ever go and look at them. So I do think it's a good way to, if you're having a hard time with physically getting rid of the physical item, to have a way to still store it, even though it's not there in the physical form anymore. You can still look at it if you wanted to. You might find that you actually don't. But in the meantime, try and declutter as much as possible physically, and then just digitize, take photos, save it somewhere. That way you still have it. Okay, tip number 6 would be to ask yourself, does this item bring me joy today? I think this is a good question to ask because a lot of the stuff we hang on to was special to us at one time, but we look at it today and we're like, it doesn't really mean the same to me anymore. So another thing I found in this box is the hospital bracelet that I was wearing when I had my 3rd child. Like this doesn't add any value to my life. I actually took my kids' bracelets from in the hospital and their little beanie hats that they wore home, and I put both of those in like a clear ornament to hang on the tree at Christmas time because I thought that was a nice way to display those things, you know, during the holiday season, just as like some way to display it. But this piece of paper bracelet that I wore, this can be discarded. This doesn't add any value to my life or bring me any joy today. Number 7, donate or repurpose or gift some of the things that maybe you are ready to part with. Specifically, if you're hanging on to something out of guilt, don't let that be a reason you hang on to something, because if it's not serving you, if it's not adding value to your life and it's just collecting dust, it can add value to somebody else's life. If you do have sentimental items that aren't serving you anymore, maybe you can feel better about letting them go if you know that it can add value to somebody else's life too. That's everything I wanted to share with you. I just ultimately hope that these tips kind of help you approach decluttering your sentimental items with a little bit more peace. It's not about getting rid of all the stuff you love. It's not about getting rid of all of your memories and everything from your past. It's about the intention of keeping what actually adds value to your life now, today, and then releasing everything else that doesn't serve you anymore. And just like a bonus tip, take your time with the process. This doesn't have to be one of those like, I'm gonna set a timer for 15 minutes and declutter my sentimental stuff. Don't do that. Sentimental stuff can take time. And if there's certain items that you just don't know how to process yet, put them aside and move on and go back to them later. It's okay if this part of the decluttering process is a bit slower in nature. Let me know in the comments some of your thoughts on the tips that I shared and any of your own experience with decluttering sentimental stuff, because I know it's different for a lot of us. As always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video.